Hi, I'm Jo from J.H.Leather, and in this video we're talking all about hand skiving techniques. So I have split this video down into 3 sections to cover the main types of skive, which are the split skive, where we reduce the overall thickness of a piece of leather, the step skive, and the bevel or slope skive. Now, before we get started, your tools will need to be super sharp for this, and now we won't be going over that in this video, but I will leave links in the description for my in-depth tools videos where I do go over how to sharpen these. Another thing to note is that, as with all crafts, there are many ways to do things, and the skiving techniques using this videos are the ones that I use, but there will be other ways of doing these as well. Starting with the split skive, the aim of this is to reduce the overall thickness of our leather, and this is great to use in conjunction with some of the other skives that we will be going over in this video when you have multiple layers of leather together. Our example is going to be on a card pocket in a wallet where there are multiple layers of leather together, which can end up being quite bulky if left full thickness. There are a couple of different tools we can use for this, and we will be starting with the French shave. Now, this is a great tool to use on thicker, more solid leathers, like this 1.5mm vegetable tanned hide I have here, but it also works on some softer hides when it is super sharp. We will start by drawing a line on our card pocket where we want to reduce the thickness from, and for me this is just below the T section. Now, depending on the leather you are using, you can use a stitch groove here and mark the line with that and use that as a guide. We can then use our French shave and reduce the thickness down from here to the bottom of our leather. One point to note is that different leathers will require different methods, as one may not be suitable. For example, this French shave cuts through this oiled hide like butter, but it won't put a dent into this vegetable tanned hide that I have that is of the same thickness. So for cases like this, we can use another technique using a skiving knife. Now, this is much harder to master, so lots of practice is required for this method. I like to use a paring knife for this, as I find it easier to control than when using a straight edge skiving knife. And this time I'm going to start from the bottom and move up the card pocket where I want the skiving to start. And you can draw lines on as a guide to help with this. As I'm right-handed, with this paring knife I'm going to go from left to right and follow the line I have made to reduce the thickness of this section of leather, before moving up and reducing the next part. And it is important to keep the knife moving from left to right, and we don't just want to push this forwards. And we're going to continue this all the way up our pocket until we have the desired area skived. When making a split skive with a paring knife, we want to hold our knife at a nice shallow angle so we don't take off too much leather. It's easier to go over the area a couple of times if needed than to take off too much and maybe ruining your piece of leather and having to start over. Once you have the bulk of the leather removed, you can then go over and remove any lumps and make it nice and smooth. So you can see the difference here in the before and after of these card pockets and how much thinner the wallet will be as a result. And by using some scrap leather, you can try both options and decide which one works best for you, as well as practice your techniques. Moving on to the step skive. As the name suggests, when in side profile, this skive looks like a step and is most commonly used for turned edges. So the first method is when using thicker veg tan leather like this 2.5mm hide, and on this example we'll be attaching a gusset into a bag, and we want the edges to be about half thickness to help the leather turn out and be stitched into the rest of the bag, like what I have here on this shoulder bag. For this we're going to use a stitch groove and a French shave. We will start by grooving a line the width that we want our turn area to be, and for me this is 1/4 inch or 6mm, which also happens to be the size of my French shave. Once we have the groove line on, we can then put one of our teeth from our French shave into that groove and carefully take a strip of leather off all the way along, keeping the tool nice and flat to get the step shape we are after. So if you only have a small French shave like the one that I have and need to take off more than the width of it, you can groove more lines in the same distance apart. So for me, if I wanted to do a 1/2 inch or a 12mm skive, I would mark 2 lines in, with one at 6mm and one at 12mm, and then go over the area twice to get my skive width. For turned edges, you can also use this method with the French shave, and I find that with the more solid vegetable tanned leathers, this method works great, especially with a 10 to 12mm skive area. Or you can use a skiving knife, and for me, I prefer the paring knife as I have more experience with this. So we'll mark the area that we want turned and draw a line here. You can also use a stitch groove depending on your leather. When using the paring knife, we want to sort of scoop down a bit to start with and then go straight out to get that step shape. We want to go down to about half thickness for this and then go just straight out. So as you can see, we have a nice step shape here, and we can now glue along here to finish the turned edge. The bevel or slope skive is where we skive our leather down into a nice even slope shape. The bevel skive is ideal for reducing leather thicknesses on buckle turns, as well as where there are going to be two pieces of leather that are stitched together to reduce the bulk, like on a bag seam. Starting with buckle turns, now if you have been following the channel for a while, then you will have seen that I use my head knife for the majority of this type of skiving, as it is a multi-use tool and it works really well for this. When making buckle turns or shapes, we want to reduce the thickness of the ends of the leather as they will end up being really bulky, and we can either reduce them down to half thickness or down to nothing. And the same technique will apply to both options. You can mark where you want your skive to start, and then what we want to do is hold our leather in our hands over the edge of our cutting surface. So for me, that's going to be over the edge of the bench, as this tile that I use is very thin. Now this allows us to have a lot more control over where our hands are and what angle we can hold our knife at. So as you can see, if we're going to be using the centre of our tile for our skive, our hands can get in the way of themselves and you end up having a very deep angle on your skive. For the skive itself, as I am right-handed and due to the shape of the blade that I am using, I'm going to go from right to left as I skive, keeping the knife moving diagonally as I move it. And we're going to carefully remove the desired amount of leather for this skive, which will be half thickness for this example. Now we want this skive to be nice and smooth with no lumps or dips in, and this can take a while to master, but by having sharp tools, this is the best starting place. And like I said, in-depth information on these will be in the description. You can also use a skiving knife for this technique if you find that easier, or if you don't happen to have a head knife. Now for longer skives where we're going to be attaching two pieces of leather together, like on a bag, we want to create the same sloping skive. This can be a bit trickier to master as we have a larger area to cover, but you can start with smaller pieces and as you get more confident, work your way up to larger lengths of leather. For these types of skives, you can use your head knife or a skiving knife, and again we're going to mark our skive line on and follow this, keeping a constant angle with our knife so we get a nice even skive. Now for this, when using my straight edge skiving knife, I like to follow the line from left to right and slowly move this forward as I go, and then repeat until the area is skived. You can also do this in sections, and for this option, then going the opposite way is a little bit easier, and we can get this first section done and then continue up the leather skiving as we go. And it can help to tape down your leather here to keep it from moving around. And as you can see, we have a nice even skive here. So that covers the 3 types of skiving used in leathercraft and how to do them by hand. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, there are other ways of doing this, and these are just the methods that I prefer and use here in the workshop. So that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching and you learned something new. And if you did, please click that thumbs up button. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing for more videos and tutorials. And I shall see you in the next video.